Okay.
And we'll just start with today's date is January 20th, 2025. And this is Sarah Holger, and I am interviewing. What's your name, sir? Could you say your name for me?
Sure. My name is Brian Dana Akers. It's Brian with an I, and Akers, A-K-E-R-S.
Wonderful. And where are you located today? Where are you at?
I'm in Woodstock, New York.
Wonderful.
It's about 2 hours north of New York City and about 1 hour south of Albany.
Okay. And I'm here in Wabasha, Minnesota today, so we're talking by telephone. So we're going to kind of start with these interview questions. We can stray off of these questions if you want, but they help keep me focused. So the first question we have, Brian, when and where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Okay. I was born in 1958 in Madison, Wisconsin, in the hospital right near the state capitol building. And a couple months after I was born, my family moved to Edina, Minnesota, which is a well-to-do suburb of Minneapolis. And then I was there through kindergarten. And then I spent grades 1 through 12 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So if people ask me where I'm from, I tend to say Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay. That's funny, Edina. I grew up in Minnetonka.
Oh.
Yeah, not too far from Edina.
Yeah.
Small world. Okay, so, well, before I ask about your ancestors, how did you end up in New York? Can I ask, what's your profession?
Okay. I'm mostly a book publisher.
Okay.
I publish bilingual Sanskrit-English books about yoga. So what I do is I translate the original yoga books from Sanskrit into English and then add some pictures, add an introduction, add an index, and then those are the books. So if you want to find out about what yoga was like 500 or 2,000 years ago, we're the source.
Wow, that's amazing. How did you get into that path? What brought you to that work?
My mom got me into yoga like when I was in junior high school. My mom was very, she's kind of ahead of her time. So this would be in like the 1960s, 1970s. And she was into organic gardening and preventative health things and like that. And she, one day she read a yoga book. And I picked it up and I said, oh, what crazy thing is Mom into now? And then I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. And then they had pictures and drawings in it. So I started practicing the different positions and stuff. And my mom said, well, there's a woman who teaches this down at the YWCA. You should take a class. I said, well, okay. So I started taking classes in 8th grade. It was this little 12-year-old kid. I was 12 years old, and in this room with about 40 or 50 middle-aged women all trying to stave off the ravages of time. And I just kept taking the classes. I took them all the way through 12th grade.
Wow.
And then I went to college in Denver, and they had a foreign language requirement. And I looked down the list of languages they offered. It was a long list. And I saw Sanskrit, and I had some vague awareness that there was some connection between yoga and Sanskrit. So I signed up for Sanskrit and studied that, and spent my senior year in South India, and came back for graduate school. And then I moved out to California for 10 years, and I was working in publishing. And then I met my future on a vacation, dropped everything in California, and moved to New York, where she lived.
Wow! Oh my goodness! Wow, that's pretty interesting. You were above. Yeah. You were ahead of the times, because now yoga is pretty common. I mean, a lot of people are taking yoga classes, and even in the small towns. So wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's go back to the focus of the interview here. Then we're kind of going to focus on your ancestor, Reverend Peter Aker. Did I say that right? Akers? Aker? So how are you related to him?
Okay. So Peter is my great-great-great-grandfather on my father's side.
Okay, so where was he born? Like, where did he live? I know he kind of hopped around a lot, but tell us, give us the backstory on him.
Yeah, he was born in Virginia in the year 1790, and he was raised in Virginia as a child. Then he spent his early adulthood in Kentucky, and then he spent the rest of his life in Illinois, except for the years 1857 to 1865. He was at Red Wing, Minnesota, and he was on the faculty of Hamline University. I imagine he's like a theology professor or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So he's a reverend, what church was he affiliated with again? Methodist?
He was Methodist circuit rider. Actually, it's interesting. When he was young, he was he did a variety of things. He was a school teacher and a lawyer and a newspaper publisher, and then kind of what they call back then is a free thinker, which I guess today we'd call maybe an agnostic or an atheist or just not affiliated with religion. But then he became a Methodist and Methodist circuit rider, and then he also became an educator. So in addition to his time on the faculty at Hamline, he served 3 terms as the president of McKendree University, and he also co-founded McMurray College. And McKendree is still going, Hamline is still going, but McMurray closed down just like a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of where he was born and where he lived and what he did.
Okay. And the Methodist Church, because I was just reading up a little bit more on him, it was specifically like the Methodist Episcopal Church, wasn't it? I think.
I don't know. I do know he was not involved primarily, but I think they split around the Civil War, if my memory's correct. And so he was, involved in that split, and then I think he regretted it later in life that the denomination split.
Sure.
I think it split between United Methodist and Southern Methodist.
Yeah, I know there was big splits in a lot of the churches over slavery and stuff around the Civil War time.
Yeah.
And the reason I point out Methodist Episcopal, because I was reading that somewhere, I'd have to go back and look again, but that church does stand out quite often in like anti-slavery and Underground Railroad stories.
Uh-huh.
So if it's specific Methodist Episcopal, that's just another little clue, like, okay, dig a little deeper there. It just gives me more things to look into. And I'll let you know, too, anything I discover on him, I'll kind of type up a bio on stuff that I find. It might not be anything different than what's already out there, but I'll share it with you, obviously.
Okay.
So, like I said, I'm just beginning to look at your ancestor because I just discovered him a couple weeks ago. But, yeah, the little things that I've read on him, I'm like, wow, I feel like there's more of a story here that hasn't been. I think after the Civil War, the language on a lot of people kind of smoothed over. So they do mention his anti-slavery views in some of the things I've read on him. And I'll let you maybe talk a little bit more about the connection to President Abraham Lincoln, because that was pretty amazing. But they don't really highlight that as like him being like an abolitionist, even though my gut is telling me there was more going on there than what's been covered in some of these writings about him. So, yeah. So I'll keep digging, and there's some little clues I've already found just when he was in Red Wing here, people he was involved with. So I'll do some digging, and I'll share with you what I find.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I'm finding like a lot of the descendants of some of these folks really don't. They're like, the only thing I know is what's been printed. I can't tell you anymore. So if you don't know more than what is, I've read what you've written here. You wrote kind of a biography about. Actually, it's your autobiography where you mention your ancestor and some of his work.
Right.
And so you know more about your ancestor than most people I've talked to. They don't know a whole lot about their ancestors. So.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because when I was growing up, I only remember him being mentioned like maybe once or twice or 3 times or something. So in our family, we knew that there was this sort of semi-famous or semi-known ancestor, but it was so long ago by that point.
Sure.
It was over a century ago that it didn't really come up. And it was only when I went to write my autobiography about 30 years ago, as I thought I'd put it up as part of my website, that I dug through some materials and found out more about him. So he was not his legend, his story, his reputation, whatever. It was not a part of our growing up
Sure.
at all.
Yeah.
And I've just learned about it as an adult myself. So
right.
it's quite interesting, yeah. So I thought I would start my autobiography with him because he's the only notable person in our family that I know of, and it's he had quite a life.
Oh yeah, wow, he was involved in a lot. I mean, he converted and educated probably thousands of people. Over his career, yeah. And I'd like to dig around a little more on the newspaper stuff that he was involved with when he was that in Kentucky, I think. I can't remember if that was Kentucky or not, but just to see what kind of stories were coming out of that newspaper, if they mentioned anything about slavery or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I assume it was just kind of like a regular, typical, general interest newspapers.
Yeah.
But that might have been in Kentucky or it might have been in Illinois. I'm not sure which, or maybe both. But I don't have any information on that. But it'd be interesting to know. Right?
Yeah. So I'll dig into that a little bit too. So okay. And then as far as his family, do you know anything about his parents or siblings? Did you look into them?
I don't know. I do know he had 3 wives.
Okay.
And because he outlived the first 2. And he had 14 children.
Holy moly.
So there's probably a whole ton of people out there you could interview, but I don't know if they'd have any more information than I do.
Sure.
Back and I don't even know how many of those children survived, maybe most of them, half of them. In the 19th century on the frontier, things were a little rough.
Right.
In terms of his ancestors, I know we have, there's another ancestor that was nicknamed Bunker John, because his name was John, and he fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill. But that's all I know about him. And I think, every time you go back one generation, you got twice as many ancestors.
Right.
So, this name Akers, this guy was back, but then a lot of my family came over later, like in the late 19th century and so on. So I don't really have anything more about him than those few facts I told you.
Sure, no problem. And then, beyond what's written, I don't know, what you've come across. Like I said, I read the autobiography you wrote, but anything that jumps out to you as far as him being involved with anti-slavery movement or other social reform efforts? I know education was a huge thing he was involved with, just educating young people, colleges. Did I read that he helped start 100 different churches or Sunday schools or something as he was because he was always being kind of reassigned to different conferences, it looked like. So he was all over. Even when he was in Illinois, he was in different parts of Illinois. At least I think that's what I just read this morning, actually.
Wow. Well, I think you're more up on it than I am. No, I mean, the most dramatic thing about his life was he gave a spellbinding sermon in 1837, and he had a prophetic passage of kind of looking ahead and thought that that slavery is going to come crashing down in the coming decades, maybe in the 1860s. And it was like a tumultuous, frontier tent revival type of meeting. A lot of people in his audience were pro-slavery, and he went on this long anti-slavery rant, and he says, "Who can we say but that a person who will lead us through this strife is standing right here?" And then, just 30 feet away from him was Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
And apparently it deeply affected Lincoln. I mean, assuming it's a true story, I kind of assume it's true.
Yeah.
It deeply affected him, and he had a very poor night's sleep. And he came in back to his law practice in Springfield, and his partner asked him, "Why do you look so haggard today?" And he said, "Well, I heard this sermon last night, and I saw myself playing an important part in that strife."
Wow.
And that's from a book called Abraham Lincoln, Man of God. It's the title. It's by John Wesley Hill, and it was published in 1920.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So, and then there's a painting of that sermon. It was funded by the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. You know, there's a lot of WPA art all around the country.
Yeah.
From FDR, the New Deal, you know, one of his things was to give money to writers and artists and stuff to document life in the United States. So there's a painting, a good-sized painting, and it's called Peter Akers' Prophecy, and that was painted in 1941 by somebody named Henry Simon.
Okay.
And what I knew is that painting, the original painting, was in the possession of the Chicago public school system.
I wonder if there's a digitized version of that online anywhere?
I have a picture of it on my autobiography. There's a little,
okay.
like if you see the prophecy, there's a little dart with a triangle there.
Yeah, I've got your page up, so let me scroll down and see. Oh, I can look at it later too. But yeah, that would be great to see what that looked like. Let's see. Well, I don't need to screw around right now. I'm like trying to scroll through the website. But yeah, no, that's good to know. I didn't catch that when I was on the website.
Yeah, so there's a picture there.
Neat. Okay.
Let's see.
I come across, and you've probably seen these, you know, and there's it seems like now with everything being digitized and AI and all that, maybe more and more stuff is online and easier to find. But there was an article, let's see, this one's called The Frontier College at the Middle West, Hamlin University, 1856 to 1869, and it's from the Minnesota History Magazine from 1928.
Wow.
Yeah, it was written by Helen Asher. And there's just a little bit of a quote in there, or a little bit of a thing about him, because it was more focusing on Hamlin University in general. But it says, the Reverend Peter... sorry. It says the Reverend... go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to read this first sentence of what she says about him. It says, the Reverend Peter Akers, who was born in Campbell County, Virginia, was evidently one of the few Southerners who went to Illinois and opposed slavery. He was known for his anti-slavery convictions and writings both at McKendree College in Illinois and during his 8 years at Hamlin. So that makes me think there's writings that we could track down somehow, maybe.
That does seem like there should be. So I got that long description of his sermon from that book, but then the other article I found really helpful was in the December 1939 issue of the Journal of the Illinois State Historical Society.
Okay.
They have an article devoted to Peter Akers.
Okay. I'll have to follow up on that. So yeah, there's little clues here and there, and then there was another article that I found once again this morning, and it was from a Methodist conference that was held in Illinois the year he passed away. So there was like a commemorative kind of insert about him and his life in that. And then it mentioned when he was in Red Wing, I can't find it now, that he specifically held a revival in Goodhue County at a schoolhouse. It names the name of the schoolhouse. Let's see, I wrote it out. The Spates Schoolhouse, where he converted 100 people. So I'm going to look into that too and see if there's any record specifically on that schoolhouse, like that's in a specific, part of Goodhue County, where maybe I can get names of people that would have attended that revival, and just then what I do is genealogy on each of them and research to see which of them might have been actively involved in abolitionist work. So it's a lot of like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of painstaking work.
But it's nice when there's little clues like that. It gives specific locations where he gave sermons and stuff, so I can do a little digging around. So you said, like, growing up, you kind of knew he was an important historical figure, but your family didn't have a whole lot of specific stories about him?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because, for him to be my great-great-great-grandfather, you're talking like 5 generations removed. So there's like two generations just between him and my great-grandfather, so, which I didn't know at all. So then It's really 3 generations before we get to my grandfather, who, I remembered when I was a kid. So I think it was just too long a time span for any stories or things to survive. But the funny thing, too, is, though, his tradition of activism sort of survived more than his stories about him. Because my grandfather on my father's side was a socialist and an active writer to like the newsletters to the editor in Superior and Duluth, Minnesota, and Superior, Wisconsin. So he had that kind of progressive mindset. And then my father was a Methodist minister, and So he started out his career, this would be in the 1940s and 50s, just as a kind of a typical minister. He founded a church in Monona Village near Madison, and then he founded a church in a Congregationalist church in Edina, Minnesota.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, and then when he moved to Kalamazoo, he got very involved with the anti-Vietnam War movement and also the civil rights movement. And then another interesting thing is, I was looking up something about Edina. I was curious about it, and I saw a mention that it was a sundown town, which means black people aren't allowed to stay there after sundown. And then I thought, God, that's really weird, because I remember we had a lot of African students in our house. My mother and father were involved with foreign students. And so I remember like 2, 3, 4 times in Edina at night, our house was just full of African, university students who were from Africa. And this would have been like 61, 62, 63. And then it got me wondering, was it really not a sundown town? Or did my father have to call up the police ahead of time and say, we're going to do this, don't arrest anybody, or what?
Or was it more like, it's a difference when they're foreign exchange students versus people that live there?
American blacks?
Yeah.
Because, they spoke very, British English and wore 3-piece suits, and, they're quite different. So maybe that's why, or maybe it was because my father was a minister, so he was able to, as a respected position in the town, able to do it, or maybe it was already dying out by then. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know, I was thinking, gosh, Edina was a sundown town, and then I thought, God, we had all these black people over at our house after dark, and I thought, wonder how that happened.
I wonder how they figured out how they could designate towns as sundown towns, because I know there's a whole list, like you can look at all the towns in Minnesota, because out down here, Albert Lee over in Freeborn County is listed as sundown town too. So it's like, what was the criteria they used? I wonder if they looked at old law enforcement records to see who was being policed indifferently after dark. I don't know how they would figure that out.
I don't know, because it seems, from what little I know about it, it seems very informal.
Sure.
Like there's no law passed or anything.
Yeah.
They would just look at property deeds or maybe people's memories or something like that. But they weren't They weren't officially. It doesn't have on the welcoming sign, "Welcome to Edina, a proud sundown town" or something like that. So it was. I guess it's sort of like general knowledge or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose they had back in the 60s and such, maybe even, I think even before that, they had those green books for African Americans. So if they were traveling, right, they knew where the safe hotels and stuff were. So maybe it correlated with that. Like you can tell where there's welcoming spaces and not, and where you're going to be chased out of town after dark if you're still around. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was an interesting thing. So yeah, like I said, so there's no real stories talked about or said or anything about Peter Akers. We just knew he was there, and we didn't really know anything about him. We never talked about him. We weren't really curious. But somehow that tradition of activism kind of went down through the generations. And also I had like some great uncles who were Methodist ministers, and there's a few more Methodist ministers, sprinkled in there.
Okay.
In some of those generations, like, immediately after Peter, like his children or grandchildren, I guess it would be those couple generations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said your grandfather was up near Duluth, a Superior area?
Yeah, he lived in Superior.
So what did he do for his profession?
Well, here's another funny repeat. When he was really young, he was in the newspaper business in Chicago in the 1920s. So that may be where he picked up his left-wing, activism, like, urban worker organization. And then he became a homesteader up in northern Wisconsin, where the soil is very poor and growing seasons are short and the winters are long, and I think he just eked out a small living doing that. And then by the time I was a kid, he had retired and he was just living in a house in Superior, Wisconsin.
What was his name?
His name was Dana Neeland Akers. The middle name is pronounced spelled K-Neeland. And so my middle name comes from his first name.
Aww.
And he was also a published poet. He wrote a lot of poems about the harshness of life in the North Country and things like that. And then there's a funny thing, that couple, James Carville and Mary Madeline. Today, James Carville's like the Democratic strategist who helped Bill Clinton get elected.
Okay.
And his wife worked for H.W. Bush and W. Bush.
Okay.
So they're a married couple, but they have opposite politics.
Uh-huh.
So my grandfather was a little bit like that because his wife, who was my grandmother, was a rock-ribbed Republican. And so they would both, and she was also a poet. And they would both write to like letters to the editor to the local papers.
Oh my goodness!
And so she would put in a letter talking about Hubert Humphrey, the bleeding heart, spineless person, and my grandfather would put in a letter talking about Hubert Humphrey, the warmonger, and they'd appear like in this kind of side by side, same last name, different first names, and
honey.
So it also made for a lot of kind of a tense atmosphere in that house from time to time.
I can imagine.
So my mother didn't really like to go visit, when we'd visit as a family.
Yeah. Her
parents were down in Black River, which is down near Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And so we'd spend more time with my mother's family than my father's family, because my mother didn't really like all the bickering back and forth between my grandfather and my grandmother.
Oh my goodness. I can imagine. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Do you know if any of his, do you have like copies of his writings and stuff, or has that been archived anywhere?
I have, they were published by little small
newspapers.
He has like 3 or 4 collections of poems.
Oh.
And they were in book form, and they're published by small independent presses. One book I know is listed in the Library of Congress.
Okay.
And they're called things like Northern Lights and stuff like that. So yeah, he does have. They're all out of print. They're back in the days, from the 1950s, 1960s, when things would. They do a little print run of 3,000, and then that was it.
Right.
Or 1,000, and that was it. Or 500, and that was it.
Yeah.
So, but and there was a magazine called Highlights. They used to have. They used to be in dental offices a lot.
Okay.
Because they're. Or doctor's offices for kids to read.
Oh,
when,
Yep.
Yeah, when you're waiting.
Yep.
So I remember to get his poetry published in that.
Huh.
And his poetry was all, mostly it was like nature's type stuff.
Okay.
So, the birch trees in the winter and, stuff like that. So, but yeah, he was pretty successful as a poet, but then the only poet actually making a living being a poet was like Robert Frost.
Sure.
And everybody else was just like it's just like an avocation.
Right.
So, but he got it published. You get your $5 to your $10.
Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. My grandpa used to polish agates, so he collected rocks and he polished them. And when he got older, he started making art. Like he would glue them onto different boards with different other materials, and he gave them away to us as presents and to family. But we found some a few years back in an antique store in St. Paul or Minneapolis, and it was our grandpa's art. Like, this is the stuff our grandpa made. And if he could have lived to have seen his stuff sold in an antique store, he would have been so proud of himself. Because he was just doing it for the pure enjoyment of it. He just enjoyed making the art. Yeah, kind of funny. But to have it recognized as like folk art, they had it in a folk art section and they were selling it. I don't know where they got a hold of it. Like maybe a Goodwill or something. I don't know. But so your grandfather Dana, then, was he like the great grandson of Peter? I'm trying to think of the.
No, he was my grandfather. So he was my father. Oh, he was my father's father.
Yeah. And
then his father is the last one I really know anything about. He was a country doctor.
Okay.
And that's a whole trip too, because he was a country doctor like at the turn of the century in northern Wisconsin, and he would be riding around in a little handsome cab, like a little one-person cab behind a horse.
Good. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And so he wasn't going horseback, but he was in a little tiny cab, like a two-wheel thing.
Yeah.
And he'd go around with his little black bag and make the rounds in countryside. And like a lot of times he was just paid in kind. So like he would he'd treat somebody and they had like no money, so they'd give him like a bushel of rutabagas or a bag of potatoes or something like that. Yeah, it's really quite different from medicine today. So I published these crazy Sanskrit yoga books, and my father was a Methodist minister and also an activist in the 1960s and 70s. My grandfather was the poet and the socialist and the homesteader. And then my great-grandfather was the country doctor who got paid in vegetables sometimes. Ooh. And then you skip to my great-grandfather. Wait, do I skip two? I skip at least one. And then Peter's my great-great-great-grandfather.
Okay.
So that's kind of it. So there's a gap there.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know, what else can I say? And then my mother's side of the family is much shorter here because they came over to the United States much later.
Sure.
So, the Akers name actually goes back to colonial times and stuff like that. My mother's side is much more recent, and they were down in central Wisconsin.
Okay. So you said you guys, after Eden Prairie, you went to Madison area, Wisconsin? That's where you grew up?
I was born in Madison.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just a couple of months after I was born, my family moved to Edina.
Edina. And then you
Yeah.
end up in California after that? Do I have
No, that was just like that was through kindergarten.
Okay.
And then for grades 1 through 12, I was in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Kalamazoo.
It's a real place.
Wow.
Western Michigan, southwestern Michigan.
Okay.
It's exactly halfway between Chicago and Detroit.
So I'm trying to think of the migration of Peter is in Illinois. I mean, he's buried in Illinois, right? Peter is?
Yeah, I think he has like a big, my mother went and actually visited it with somebody. He has like one of those big kind of spire gravestones that go up they're like little obelisks.
Oh, sure.
And it goes up like 10 or 15 feet.
Okay. Wow.
And it has some inscription about his life. And also the residents of Jacksonville, Illinois, when he was old, they gave him a free house to live in.
Oh my gosh.
Just because they thought it was a great honor to have him living in their town.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Okay. So then like you said, there's 2 generations there that don't know a whole lot about, but somehow they end up where your grandfather's up in northern Minnesota. So they migrated from Illinois up, heading north?
Let me see. I think the family was more in Illinois.
Okay.
I think Peter was just there for those 8 years around the Civil War in Red Wing before Hamlin moved, and then my father and our family were in Edina from 1958 to 1964.
Okay. So your grandfather, Dana, where was he born? Do you know?
I think he was born in Illinois.
Okay.
But I actually don't know that for sure. I think he moved as a young boy up to Wisconsin with the doctor.
Your great grandpa who was the country doctor.
Yeah,
okay.
The country doctor.
Okay. And I mean, I'll play around with the genealogy too, just because it's always interesting to like go back a few generations and then try to track like the brothers and sisters and see what they ended up doing. And sometimes you find some interesting things, but I haven't done that yet, so I'm not real familiar with their migration story. That he goes from being born in Virginia, then he's in Kentucky, and then he goes from Kentucky to Illinois, right?
Right, that's Peter, correct.
Yeah, and then he's in Minnesota, like you said, just for those few years, and then he's back in Illinois. But in Illinois, like I said, he's being reassigned to different Methodist conferences, so he kind of moves around a little bit.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're a circuit rider, you're like on a horse, and you give a sermon, and then you go to the next town, and hold a meeting, and then go to the next town. And so I don't know how large their areas were, but it wasn't very heavily populated then.
Right.
So he could have been covering quite a large area.
For sure. I mean, that's something, though, if the residents of that Jacksonville, Illinois, gave him a free house to live in, I mean, that's saying something that they really recognized his contribution to society,
Yeah, that's true, because it wasn't like some government grant. It was like they all just kind of pitched in and built a house or, gave him a house to live in.
Yeah, so I'll dig into that a little more too and see if there's more written about that. Do you know then of any like journals or diaries or anything like that either Peter or any of his children would have left behind that would be archived anywhere?
That I don't. I mean, the 2 big sources are the ones I mentioned to you, that book and then that article in the Illinois Historical Society.
Okay.
So, it's a good thing you're doing this, because, I don't know, after me,
right?
Who knows what happened with all this stuff. Yeah. So, I don't really have any physical diaries or any. My great grandfather, the doctor, actually kept a journal, and I have a lot of those.
Okay.
And they're kind of sad reading at times.
Yeah.
Because he's just out there all alone, making the rounds on his handsome cab. Taking care of people and wondering if anybody misses him back at home and stuff like that. A little sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have like 10 or 20 journals of his, but then they don't say anything about Peter. They're all just kind of describing his daily life, like delivered a baby here, saved a life here, wasn't able to save this guy, sent this guy to the city for amputation or whatever,
Where is he buried at, that country doctor? Did he get buried in northern Wisconsin?
I presume he's buried in northern Wisconsin, yeah. I know my grandfather Dana is, because I remember going to the funeral.
Okay.
And he's buried, I think it's at Devil's Lake, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I had one more question.
Sure.
And it just left my mind. Let's see if I can remember what it was. We were talking about country doctor.
Well, do I have any thoughts or stories? Do I have any, what do I feel about them, maybe?
Oh, yeah. I mean, being that he was definitely anti-slavery. I mean, he spoke about it, sounds like repeatedly. And when you research that era, it really was like the church played a huge role in activating the country, and sparking the Civil War. It became like a religious, really there's a religious foundation to that whole Civil War. So like, what are your thoughts then on the role that, I don't know if it's disrespectful for me to say Reverend Akers played in bringing an end to slavery. How do you feel about that?
Well, I thought about it, and my first reaction was I'm quite proud of the family tradition and the, the family, his contributions and so forth. And then my second thought was, well, that's his achievements. It's not really my achievements. Yeah. So I shouldn't feel too proud because it's not something I did myself. I've just put in a very small effort trying to keep his memory alive and document their lives a little bit. And maybe every once in a while I get an email from somebody saying they read my autobiography and they were impressed or inspired or something like that. But so I'm quite proud of their achievements, but I myself don't really have those kind of achievements.
Oh, come on. What, the yoga stuff? That changes people's lives, and brings understanding of other cultures, and Yeah, that's true. Let's see. And I did write a manifesto, actually, which I'm in the process of things. If you email me a snail mail address, I'd be happy to send you a free copy. Oh, that would be great. I just wrote it last year. And, it's quite interesting. It's very short. It's a very short book, and it's quite lively. And I'd be more than happy to send you a free copy. Oh, that would be wonderful. Yes, I'll do that as soon as we get off the call here. Okay. Any other thoughts that come to mind before we say goodbye? Well, I guess, one of the funny things is how he was just fading from memory. And now with the internet and genealogy and everything, he's sort of, he's coming back to life a little bit more. So I think that's kind of interesting, really. Or at least from my personal perspective, I heard the name when I was a kid, and now I'm 66 now. So here I am at 66, having this talk with you. So that's kind of interesting how you don't know anything about something, and you'd think as you got more remote from it in time, you'd know even less. There'd even be less history and so on. But instead, it's not the case. Right? And what's amazing is now they're digitizing all these old newspapers and things, and so it's getting easier and easier to find information that maybe people didn't even know was out there 20, 30 years ago. So, yeah, we might be able to find more things, I would say primary source where it's like his words, his writings, where it's coming directly from him, which would be pretty amazing. So Yeah, so if I come across those things, I'll share them with you. Like I said, I hope to put together, on everybody I'm researching, a story, like a little biography just on what I've been able to find, and then share with the descendants that I'm working with. So I'll definitely forward on anything that I come across. Yeah, and then once I get this interview transcribed, like I said, I'll send you the copy of that. And
Okay.
then, yeah, hopefully within the year it's archived with the Minnesota Digital Library. So I really appreciate
Okay.
your time, and yeah, we'll stay.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. You have a wonderful day today.
Okay, you too. Yeah, send me your snail mail address and I'll send you a couple books.
Okay, sounds good. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot for calling.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.